I'm Ann Jacobs. I'm the director of the Prisoner Reentry Institute at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, and I'm really pleased to be here today and to have all of you join us for the release of Three-Quarter Houses, A View from the Inside. The study took about a year and is the first study of the underground housing market called Three-Quarter Houses from the perspective of residents and former residents. The research was a collaboration of the Prisoner Reentry Institute with MFY Legal Services and Neighbors Together, two organizations that have been working on three-quarter house issues for several years, representing tenants in illegal evictions, providing services to them, providing training and support. I especially want to thank my partners in this work, Tanya Kessler, Matt Main, Raquel Namouche from MFY Legal Services, and Amy Bloomsack from Neighbors Together for the really incredible collaboration that I experienced in the course of doing this work. And I want to thank Matt Bond from the Prisoner Reentry Institute for the production of the report and for the production of this event today. There's so many people to thank. I also want to thank TOP, the tenant organizing project founded by MFY and Neighbors Together. Several TOP members joined the research team as research assistants, and some of them are here today. I want to especially thank Daryl Herring, Tasha Burnette, Robert Brown, Keith Merrick, Daryl Nelson, and Eric Britton. And we want to thank the Furman Center for Real Estate and Urban Policy at the New York University, Ryan Moser from the Corporation for Supportive Housing, Tracy Gardner and Sebastian Solomon from the Legal Action Center, all of whom gave us assistance at various stages of this process. So today's program is going to start with you hearing from the research team. First, you're going to hear from Tasha Burnette, a research assistant on the project. Then you're going to hear from Robert Riggs, who was the lead researcher and lead author of the study. And then we have a panel of discussants. Jerilyn Perine, the executive director of the Citizens Housing Planning Committee, who's an urban planner with 30 years of experience in housing and community development. She was commissioner of HPD under mayors Giuliani and Bloomberg. We're going to hear from Joanne Page, who for the last 24 years has been the executive director of the Fortune Society. And the Fortune Society has had a long commitment to housing and opened the Fortune Academy in 2002, which is a residence housing men and women who've been released from prison into homelessness. And then in August 2010, Fortune opened the doors of Castle Gardens, which is a mixed-use, green, supportive, and affordable housing development. And then we're going to hear from Tanya Kessler, who's a staff attorney on the Three-Quarter House project at MFY Legal Services. She's been there since 2009 when she was a Skadden Fellow and started the Three-Quarter House project. Prior to law school, she's worked as a community organizer in adult homes and a case manager and housing specialist in shelter programs, working with homeless individuals with mental health disabilities, so she knew the issue before she went to law school. And then we're going to open up the conversation for questions and answers and discussion with you. So again, thank you for coming, and I want to introduce Tasha to you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tasha Burnette. I'm currently a student at LaGuardia Community College for Music Technology. I'm also a junior minister at my church, Love Fellowship Tabernacle in Brooklyn. Also, I'm a bus driver and sometimes a supervisor dispatch for Skyline sightseeing tours. I have my own studio apartment now, which I work and I do music engineering from my house. And I have personal knowledge about the three-quarter houses. When I was incarcerated, I was on my way to college. I worked with Fortune Society College Initiative, and they helped me get into school. And I was referred to a three-quarter house out in Brooklyn where the experience was okay while the time I was living there. But one day I came home from work and I got legally evicted. They said they turning the facility into a male's facility. But I'm the type of person to stand up for my rights, so I didn't leave until like 2 weeks later. So I really didn't have too much knowledge about three-quarter houses, and what I thought it was a structured program because they would force you to go to drug treatment, and in the beginning you could read all these great things about it, but unfortunately that wasn't the case. My second three-quarter, after the 2 weeks I left, I went to a second three-quarter house, which was owned by personal ownership, which they didn't, the stipulations wasn't to go to a drug program, so it was like a free-fall. You do, basically whatever you want, and I was always taught, freedom is responsibility, so I was responsible there. I still continued to go to my program, even though I wasn't mandated to. But at the end of all of that, the manager was using, and we brought proof to the owner, and then the owner just got fed up after all the allegations against the manager and abandoned the house. Then the managers was coming and extorting us, taking out the money that we was giving them for utilities and using drugs with them. So eventually we had a shut off, and then I put the bill in my name, National Grid, the gas and hot water in my name, and I wound up having an outstanding bill because nobody was paying the bill, and I couldn't do it on my own. I had a part-time job at the time, and it was minimum wage. So, and saying all of that, when we were forced to get the legal eviction again at the second house, I met MFY. I met with Tanya at the legal clinic that they had at Neighbors Together. That's how I was able to join TOP. And TOP is a three-quarter house organization project with former and currently people that's living in three-quarter houses, where we stand up for our rights and teach people about illegal evictions and how it's wrong, and a leg to stand on, with MFY involved in giving us our rights and presenting it to the police officers if we get illegally evicted or they try to throw us out. The problems that I described, unfortunately, I'm not the only one. A lot of us go through these problems with the managers illegally evicting us and overcrowding the house and not working on repairs and basically abandoning the house and then abandoning us. But in saying all of that, I wouldn't have went far if I didn't have the three-quarter house. I just dealt with everything. So that's why we're here, to try to get some like regulations and structure from the government, because these houses are definitely needed for people to get on their feet. Whether you formerly incarcerated, mental illness, or you just lost your job or got evicted from your apartment, is open for everyone. So we are here to fight for our rights. And so now I'm gonna pass it over to Robert Riggs, and thank you for your time.
Good morning. So I'm happy to be talking today on a day we haven't gone over the fiscal cliff. So my role today is to discuss the research and to present a summary of our findings. So I just want to give an overview of our presentation first, and then I'll go into each of these areas in more depth. So first I'll talk about our research methods, then I'll go into giving some background information on three-quarter houses, talk about our key findings, and then just conclude with a summary of what we think the implications of our findings and report are. So the research methods. So given our interest in finding out what the conditions were like inside the houses, we knew we wanted to talk to people, the people who know them best, and that's the people who live in them. Can everyone hear me? Okay. And that's the people who live in them. So our population of interest was three-quarter house tenants. And we recruited the population in multiple ways. We posted flyers, we did direct outreach, we also relied on intragroup social connections, meaning we asked people who were participating if they would invite people that they also knew who lived in three-quarter houses. That yielded a sample of 43 unique individuals, and all of them met two specific eligibility criteria. They were 18 or older, and they were a current tenant of a three-quarter house, or they had lived in a three-quarter house in the year prior to participating. So our primary method of collecting data was focus groups, and we did 4 focus groups with 4 to 8 participants each. We also did what we're calling roundtable discussions, and these were essentially also just focus groups, but they were focused on a specific issue that we had identified in the first round of focus groups. And we did 4 of those, and there were 4 to 6 participants in each one. We also did 5 individual interviews. And we did the interviews because we wanted to get some more detailed information about what a day in the life of a three-quarter house tenant was like, and a better description of what the inside of the houses looked like. So we also had everyone fill out, all 43, filled out a questionnaire that contained items we wanted to know about each of our participants. So now moving on to the second section, the background information. The question is, what are three-quarter houses and where do they come from? So the short answer is that three-quarter houses are essentially one and two family homes, residential apartment buildings, and other kind of residential structures that rent beds to single adults. As far as we can tell, they're primarily for-profit entities, and they're unlicensed. They're not licensed by any government agency. They do not provide in-house services, although they often promise to do so. And then they're funded almost entirely by public dollars. So they tailor their rents typically to people's benefit amounts. So people on Human Resources Administration public assistance typically get $215 a month for what's called a shelter allowance. And the houses will charge exactly that amount of rent to those tenants. If a tenant is on Social Security insurance or Social Security disability, they charge more for the exact same bed, $300, $350, maybe a little more. And where they came from is a very long and drawn-out question, and we go into depth in the report. But it's safe to say, I think, that they arose and they exist today because of a lack of truly affordable housing options for this population, and that's really the issue. So the next piece of background information is who lives in the houses. So our research suggests that it's a very diverse group of people, but they do all tend to be in some sort of transitional phase of their life. So they were coming out of prison, they were coming out of a city shelter, they were trying to get off of the street, they may have lost a job or their homes due to some sort of trauma, a death in the family, severe illness. And they overwhelmingly subsist on public dollars. Most of our tenants were on public assistance from HRA. And they end up in the houses through multiple referral sources. So substance abuse treatment programs will make referrals. Other houses make referrals to other houses. The courts sometimes make referrals. The shelters, although much less so than usual, and under some guidelines now, still do, I think, make some referrals. Parole refers people, and then people find out about the houses through word of mouth. So where are the houses and how many are there in New York City? The short answer to that is that we can't say for certain. There's no real way to obtain a formal count because they aren't registered. It's not as if you can go and just look at a registry and find out how many there are. What we were able to do was to obtain an informal account of 317 addresses, and this list of addresses was put together by advocates who work on three-quarter house issues and by people who work directly with three-quarter house tenants, and it basically was, they just recorded people's addresses and came up with a list of 317. So what we were able to do with those addresses was give them to the new NYU Furman Center for Real Estate and Urban Policy, and they analyzed them for us in a couple of ways. One of the things they did was to map the addresses for us, and that showed us that the houses tend to be concentrated in New York City's poorest communities. So this is the first map, and it shows the spatial distribution of the addresses, and as you can see, they're heavily concentrated in those areas of Brooklyn, and also quite a lot in the South Bronx, and then scattered about in other areas. This is the same information on another map, and it shows the concentration of addresses by community district. And again, you can see the concentration. The darker the color, the higher the concentration. So the other thing the Furman Center was able to do for us was to connect the 317 addresses with records from the Department of Buildings, the New York City Department of Buildings, and what we found out was that complaints and code violations are really common in these houses. So for example, in that sample of 317 addresses, 90% had at least one recorded violation or stop work order issued by the New York City Department of Buildings. And I think the time period there was something like between 2005 and 2011 or 12. And on the issue of housing codes, it's also important to note that there is an old housing code on the books in New York City that makes cohabitation by 3 unrelated persons in the single dwelling illegal. So this makes three-quarter houses virtually illegal on their face. But the issue of housing code violations are clearly a problem in these houses. So I want to move on to the findings section now. And what we get from talking to tenants that we don't get from looking at addresses or records is a real sense of what it's like to live in the houses. And one of the things we find out is that the houses present serious safety and health issues. So one of the most common problems is overcrowding, severe overcrowding in the houses. So rooms will include anywhere from 2 to 8 people in bunk beds typically. So sometimes bunk beds will be on all 4 walls of a room. Sometimes bunk beds will be placed in hallways and even kitchens in some cases. This contributes to another issue, which is fire hazards in the houses. So we heard about blocked windows blocked by bunk beds being placed in front of them, inadequate means of egress in general, a lack of smoke detectors in houses, jerry-rigged electrical wiring, overloaded electrical circuits, and then illegal subdivisions of rooms. The environments can also be very unhealthy. So we heard about things like severe infestations of bed bugs, rats, roaches, and then also some structural issues in the houses and repairs that don't get made, leaks that are left to fester into serious mold issues in the houses. And then when repairs do get made, they're often done in substandard ways. So I just want to illustrate this section with a quote from a tenant. And he says, "We went about a month with no electricity on the 2nd floor, but then we got like a 50-foot industrial extension cord running from the 1st floor to the 2nd floor so that I could have lights and heat and stuff in my room because we had power strips. Yeah, 3 of those. I worried because you got 5 different rooms up there with electric heaters in them, but they called an electrician and he rewired the building. Everything's on 1 circuit now. There's 2 circuit boxes, but the electrician cut an extension cord and ran the wire from 1 box to the other. That's how we got lights in the whole house. I watched him do that, and I just said, Lord, please save us. It's dangerous, a real bad situation." And that was a 55-year-old male tenant. So I want to move on now to the second finding section, which is we find that the houses often engage in very questionable practices that are illicit, if not illegal. So the first is illegal evictions. It's a very common problem in the houses. And these things happen really without any regard at all for tenants' well-being, where they'll go afterwards. Sometimes a tenant will come home to find their belongings packed up into a bag, which is set by the front door, and the bed they had been renting occupied by someone else. And they can happen for quite arbitrary reasons, a simple personal dispute between a house employee and a tenant. And these can be especially problematic for people on parole, because people on parole are mandated to be in the address that they give to their parole officer. So if they get evicted, this can create some serious problems. Another issue that is very questionable is house-mandated substance abuse treatment. So the houses typically, not all of them, but many of them mandate substance abuse treatment as a condition of residency. And there are OASIS guidelines, the Office of Alcoholism and Substance Abuse Treatment Services in New York City. That's a state agency, I'm sorry. There are guidelines that say anytime a facility ties housing to substance abuse treatment in the way these houses do, they should be licensed to do so, and these houses are not licensed. So that it's a very questionable practice. So one reason for an eviction, a very common reason, is when a tenant completes substance abuse treatment. So in addition to that, the mandating of treatment violates tenants' right to choice in treatment, because houses don't mandate treatment at any treatment program. It's not as if the tenant can go out and pick a program that works for them. They have to attend the treatment, the particular program that the houses have some kind of ongoing relationship with. And this tying housing to treatment in this way really incentivizes tenants to fabricate or exaggerate substance abuse histories, and even to relapse in some cases because they don't want to finish treatment, because if they do, they might get evicted. So the other thing in this area is what we think is some evidence of potential abuse of Medicaid funds. So the way this works is the houses typically require that tenants submit proof of attendance, and the proof comes in the form of a piece of paper called slips. And these slips are collected with a special vigor by the house employees, and then we think they're turned into the programs, and then the houses are remunerated by the programs on some sort of per slip arrangement. Even if the programs can say that the funds don't come directly from Medicaid, any kind of funds transfer to the houses in this way would seem to be in violation of the federal anti-kickback statute, simply because the treatment is typically paid for by Medicaid. So here's a quote from a tenant that illustrates the way the slips work. So he says, "That's so important for them to have that pink slip. I wish I had a copy. It has the program's name, the counselor's name, and your name, and the day you attended the program. Here's one. It's different colors every day. They stamp it at the program, so you don't have those. They stamp it at the program, so you give these slips to the houses at the end of the day. If you don't have those slips, you have to make it up, meaning you have to make up the session you missed, even if it's on a Saturday or on a holiday." And he says this is like law that you have that slip. Excuse me. And that was a 46-year-old male tenant. So moving on to the third section of the findings. So I've been talking about some really serious problems with the houses, but I want to mention some positive things about the houses. And it's important to note two things here. One is that the houses vary considerably in terms of their living conditions and how they treat tenants. Some of them are a lot worse than others. And even with the problems in the houses, tenants overwhelmingly report that they would rather live in the houses than in the shelter, and they don't want them closed down. So we wanted to know what it was about the houses that works for tenants. So we asked them what they like about the houses, and we found out that several things seem to work. One of them is that the houses give the tenants a chance to practice some independence. And we think this gives them this sort of dignity of having an address, a home, a place they can come and go as they please and call their own to some extent. And they can also practice independent life skills as they transition into more permanent, stable housing. And then the houses sometimes balance that independence with a degree of structure, and this can be especially important for people who are transitioning from much more restricted environments like prison or residential substance abuse treatment. They see it as a path a step on the path to self-sufficiency, and they think it helps keep their recovery and their reintegration on track. They also sometimes live together for a length of time. They're in similar life circumstances, and they develop camaraderie, and they're able to work together to provide each other with information, emotional support, whatever it may be. And tenants tend to like that aspect of the houses as well. So I want to read a quote to illustrate this section. This tenant says, "When you live with people for a length of time, there's like that sense of family. You have somebody that you can complain about stuff with, and they'll complain with you. You know what I mean? That's kind of good. I think about, a couple of the barbecues we've had on Thanksgiving, how everybody pulled together and stuff like that. So even though it has its downsides, there's a flip side to every coin." And that's a 44-year-old female tenant. So the final findings section, sometimes the houses can impede tenants' recovery and reintegration. So one of the most serious issues in this area is drug use in the houses. Tenants report sometimes open drug use by other tenants, and use of things like marijuana, crack cocaine, pills, and even use by house managers in some cases, the very house managers that are enforcing the mandate to attend treatment in some cases. So there are also issues with probation and parole, and I should mention that the drug use in the houses can have very serious consequences for people on probation or parole, because it could cause a violation and even reincarceration for that population. The other issues related to probation and parole is that sometimes the house employees will use the tenant's status against them in order to control them. So if they make a complaint about a condition in the house to some New York City department through 311, for example, they often threaten to call the PO, or if there's some kind of personal dispute, they often threaten to call the PO in order to control tenants. In addition to that, some of the conditions in the houses will obstruct tenants' own efforts to engage in self-improvement. So sometimes the rules of the houses, especially the treatment mandate and some of the curfew and meeting rules, can hinder tenants' attempt to find employment, to attend college, to look for a job. And these, and also evictions are another serious way that the houses can really derail a person's reintegration and recovery and putting them almost back to square one. So a quote for that section, this is a 31-year-old male tenant who says, "I saw people sit up at the kitchen table and sniff dope and crush up pills and sniff them, and I feel that's endangering my recovery. One time, this man was standing at the stove with his stem smoking crack off the burner, and some of the house managers even get high. I saw them sit in our houses and get high with clients. I mean, they try to tell you to do the right thing, but it's do as I say, not as I do." So that concludes the findings section, and I want to just give a summary of what we think the implications of the research and report are. So first, we think a wholesale closing of the houses would be catastrophic because it would put people out of the only homes they have and onto the street and potentially into the shelter system, and that's a system that is probably not equipped to handle such an influx of a whole new population. We also think there has to be some kind of pathway to making the houses safe and legal and to improving the living conditions inside of them. And at a bare minimum, that's going to require some type of standards to be set and some sort of oversight of the houses. And finally, there needs to be some innovative ideas about how to make the houses financially viable. They can't operate unless they're financially viable, and there's some real issues that contribute, some real structural issues that contribute to some of the problems like overcrowding, and some of those, for example, the HRE shelter allowance at a very low $215 a month is one of those problems. And so there needs to be ideas about how to make the houses financially viable, and that's it. And I want to just close with a quote from a tenant, and then I'll turn it over to Anne. This is a 55-year-old male tenant who says, "I want to make a statement that three-quarter houses are a needed housing situation, and you can get people from all walks of life living in them. I ended up there not because I didn't want to work, but because I was living with my grandmother and she died and I couldn't afford the house anymore. We're still human beings and money is being paid for rent. We deserve a decent place to live." Thank you.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you for all the work that you did to lead this project over the year we were working together. So now I want to introduce you to Jerilyn Perine, who will start with our panel of discussants. I'm not going to get up and down in between each of the speakers. When Jerilyn is finished, Joanne Page will follow, and then Tanya Kessler, and then we'll open it up for discussion.
Thanks, Anne. I wanted to start by just putting this issue in a broader context. I am not in any way an expert on three-quarter housing. I have spent most of my career working on issues of housing in communities in a variety of different ways. My organization is the oldest research and policy organization in the city that focuses exclusively on housing, and we've been doing that since the 1930s. So we have this long history of looking at the housing market as a whole and looking at issues within it and thinking about ways that we can try to move public policy in order to improve the situation both in communities and in the city as a whole. So the first thing is, I guess I would push back a little bit on one of the things that Robert said, which is that the reason these things are happening is because of a lack of affordable housing. This is one of those, affordable housing is one of those terms that it's all things to all people. If I say those words, I guarantee that each of you in this room will conjure a different definition of it. The issue is a lot less about just the broad-based lack of affordability and much more about remembering that housing policy translates our society's values. And since the 1950s, our values have been to obliterate housing for single adults in all aspects of the housing policies and our regulatory framework. And so I think it's important to understand that context, and it's very specific and it was very targeted, even to the point that if you look at census data prior to the 1950s, defined a household as anybody living in that housing unit. In 1950, that definition changes to be either a family or a non-family household. So there's this huge shift about how we think about who lives in housing. Housing policy wants them to be families. That's what we're seeking people to be. That's what housing policy reflects. And you see it in every part of our physical built environment. We've outlawed, you know, all in the name of good, all in the name of good intentions. Lodging houses, same-sex hotels, the YMCA went out of business, SROs, I mean, a whole variety of housing types. We even have buildings, there's still a few left that have certificates of occupancy that are called bachelor apartments. So what's that? Well, these were small buildings where